Alright, rebuilding these solenoids. You'll have to excuse our friends next door. They've got to keep these aircraft going. So they got quite a few aircraft to work on today. So you will hear them. This bolt right here comes out. And then you take this bracket off. That gives you access to where the pins are. The solenoids will be down in here with the pin holding them in place. Now, you push and the valve will be in there too, pushing on the solenoid, which is holding the pin trapped. You push the solenoid in, you pull the pin out, or you can flip the valve body upside down and push the solenoid in and out until the pin falls out. Or push the solenoid in and pull that out with a magnet. Either way, you got to get the solenoid out, and the solenoid's going to look like this on the back side before you start with the shift kit. You grind this on the grinder at a 45-degree angle, spinning it round and round and round while the grinder grinds and grinds and grinds until see a little metal ring will come off. Grinding creates this ring. There's not a separate ring until you're grinding. And then that pops off. This little end cap pops out. And you'll see the armature behind here. You can be careful when you're grinding not to grind this armature. The armature, when it's coming out, you'll see there's a little brass washer there. Do not lose that washer. And that's what the solenoid looks like inside. You're going to have to grind around here to grind the burr off. This edge right here that will be left from your grinding. Alright? When you're done, it's going to look like this. We'll show you how that happens. Here I'm going to take this one that I ground, and first of all, take this one's all nasty still that I've ground, and you take that apart, set your armature aside, take your brake clean, spray up inside here, get some of that nasty out. I know that's off camera, but I didn't want to spray stuff all over my nice clean ones. You're going to spray down here to get this valve clean. Again, I'm doing this over here so I don't get my other parts dirty. Then you're going to measure this armature, and that's 1.57. You'll find, I'm reading the shift kit, 1.57 means you've got to use the long drill bit. The long drill bit goes in here, and I like to hold it upside down in case there's any debris come out. The debris will fall out instead of falling in. Turn it counterclockwise as you go in, being very careful not to damage the bushings. Make sure it's all the way up in there. You can tell when it's all the way up in there when if you press, the valve moves. Okay, so then you go clockwise, clockwise, clockwise. I like to do 20 times. 8, 9, 10, 12, 13. In the shift kit it says to do it for 15 seconds. So I've found that 20 times does just fine. And as you back out, you go counterclockwise, very carefully, counterclockwise, so that you don't make any grooves in the bushing. Now I like to clean my drill bit before I move on to the next one. Just pull it counterclockwise backwards out of a piece of paper towel. Makes it nice and clean. And take the brake clean to this again. Now you can see how nice and clean it is, and you can see my markings where I mark every solenoid before I remove a solenoid from any valve body, especially these. You don't want to swap these around. They are not dummy proof. They will go in the wrong holes. Spray your armature off. Make sure your bushing is still in your armature. Your washer is still in the armature. Put your armature up in there, and then take your thumb and push it up, and watching the valve and feeling of the valve, make sure the valve moves very freely. Then let the armature drop out to make sure it can just drop out under its own weight. If it cannot drop out under its own weight, then once the vehicle gets warmed up, it will start sticking. This is the whole purpose of resizing the bushings, is so that when the vehicle gets warm, the armature won't stick. Okay. And we take one of the caps from the shift kit, set the cap on top, try to get it nice and straight. Set that down here on the table. I don't know if you can see, but I've got a second table over here. That way when I bang on things, the table with all my parts doesn't bounce around and vibrate. I have a piece of pipe that fits very nicely over here. You can use a socket if you have just the right size deep well socket. Just be very careful around this nose cone. You do not want to damage that. You don't want to loosen it up either. Take a big block of wood. See if it went all the way down in there. Did it very nicely down on there, nice and straight. People, that's pretty much it. Your solenoid is done. Now, of course, I tested these with a voltmeter before I even took them out of the valve body. And to test them, let me get the voltmeter and just show you. Okay, so you want to put one connector on one pin and one on the other. And do 5.8, 5.7 ohms. Needs to be between 5 and 7 ohms. And you need to put on one connector to the housing. See, there's nothing. And one connector, the other connector to the housing. Make sure there's no continuity between either one of the pins and the housing. That means it's not shorted out. And I've done this to every one of those before I even took it off to make sure they are buildable. Once you're done with all of them, you'll want to put them back in the valve body. The spring first, then the valve, then the solenoid, then the pin. And once all are in there, you can put your bracket back on to hold all the pins in place. Okay. Spring and valve. I'm holding it this way so that the spring stays in the valve as I put it up in there. you tilt it the other way, yeah, gravity's going to try to help you, but then the spring's going to go first. Once you've successfully gotten that valve and spring all the way in there correctly, take your pick and push on the valve. Slowly release it back up. Don't flick it, it'll come flicking out. You'll have to start all over again. Push on it all the way to the bottom. Ease it up. Do that a couple of times to make sure it's moving very freely. Once you're satisfied that it works really well, or you've taken it out and cleaned it again to make sure that it moves really free, you can put your solenoid in place. As I've said before, I marked these before I took them out. I also laid them out exactly the way they came out. This way I can confirm they're going with, and this is where the pin goes, right here. You see that? So that's going to face just like this because the pin goes right there. So if you're wondering where this ends up landing, it lands over here so that this slot is facing the pin. Keep an eye on that. There. You'll have to push in slightly, and the pin drops all the way down in there. See the pin drop down in there real nice? And then just push on it a couple of times. You can see it's got a little bit of a wiggle room, but it's down in there nice and snug. And then just repeat the process. And just so you know, in case you've mixed up your valves and you're not sure which one goes where, see this spring and valve goes right here. This spring and valve goes right here. This spring and valve goes right here. And you notice they all look quite a bit different, except maybe these two springs right here. These two springs look a lot alike. They look pretty identical, these two springs. I would not swap them around, but if you're not sure, I think that these two, from the way I look at it, are exactly the same. So I don't think it would cause a problem if those springs got swapped around. Just make sure, you know, I don't think this spring will even go in there. Yeah, it will not go in the wrong one here. So it's definitely going to end up in that valve. Like I said, if you've mixed up the valves, this will probably help you. Okay, once you have all your solenoids in place, each one of your pins in place, and you push on, double check, feel right. Notice the connectors are all laying in this direction. Got this bracket goes right here. And two bolts. And torque on these bolts won't be as critical as the other valve body bolts, but the other valve body bolts are 20 foot-pounds. These are so small and delicate. Just want to snug them by hand. Notice I'm not grabbing this and choking down on it. I get right up near the middle so that I can't over tighten them, and just make them snug. Brackets on, solenoids are on. So you're going to do the same thing for these two solenoids over here and their bracket. And that's how you refurbish the solenoids on the 09G, also known as TF60SN. Now, whether you're watching this as part of as a standalone video on how to remanufacture the solenoids, or as part of the rebuilding the valve body for a TF60N 09G, either way, till the next video, get off the couch and get dirty. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment. Put your questions down below. Until next week, get off the couch and get dirty. Okay, so I'm doing the solenoids. This is what it's going to look like when you first start. You hold this up to the grinder and grind around this edge here until you end up with this. You'll notice you're grinding, a little bit comes off and you'll end up with this little cap coming out. You'll have burrs around the edge and you have to grind off the burrs around the edge, and you'll see the armature sticking out. Be very careful not to grind the armature. When you pull the armature out, you'll see this little washer here. Make sure you find this washer and put it back in there. Don't lose the washer. It's the armature from all angles. The washer is in there so we don't lose it. It goes in just like that. You see down inside there. That's what it looks like when it's nice and clean. Now, I've cleaned this one really well with the brake clean. I've already resized the bushings with the long drill bit. I used the long drill bit because I measured it with the dial calipers and found that it was 0.157 inches in diameter, the armature. This is what it looks like completely done. To show you what that looks like, measure this 157. Glasses on, make sure. Yes, 0.157. So since this is 0.157, use the long drill bit. And I like to, you put it, spin backwards as you put it in here so as not to damage the bushing. Make sure it's all the way in there. Once it's all the way in there, if you push a little bit, you can see that it moves the valve. I like to hold it upside down so any debris that's trying to fall out can fall out instead of falling back in. So turn back and forth while making sure it stays up in there. It says for 15 seconds, so I do this, I count how many times I do it, and do it about 20 times. Okay, then turn backwards as you come out. There. And you take the brake clean, and again you want to hold it upside down. I'm going to hold this away from all the other parts. When I do this, I like to stick the brake clean up in there a little bit, and I'm going to hold this away. I don't know if you can see up in there, but you can see dirty brake clean with trash and stuff, you need to do this valve as well and get this valve nice and clean. You need to take the armature, spray it off with some brake clean. Make sure you don't lose that washer. You put it in here and make sure it can fall out on its own weight. Just fall right out of there. Yeah, it just falls right out. That lets you know that you did resize the bushings enough. And you want to blow this all out with compressed air. Then I like to look down here where I can see the valve and push the armature up in there, watching the valve and feeling of it to make sure the valve is moving freely, which it is. And you take one of the caps from the Transgo shift kit and place it nice and straight on the top of the solenoid. Press just a little bit around. And you're better off using the press or an arbor press, but for efficiency and expediency's sake, I like to take a piece of pipe because these aren't very hard to put on there. And this piece of pipe fits nicely right snugly up against the metal there, so we're not touching the nose cone at all. Hold that up there. And I like to take a piece of wood and tap this down. Now you can actually do this in your hand because it doesn't take a lot of force to get that cap on there. See? And the wood's not going to deform the metal, especially with the little bit of force that I'm using. Or you can brace it against the table like so, and then use the piece of wood and gently tap. And then just look at the solenoid, and it having this ink line around here makes it pretty easy to give you a good idea of whether it's on there nice and straight all the way around. Never hit this with a metal hammer anywhere. Now I hit this with a metal hammer in the middle, on the edge, anywhere. Just don't hit this with a metal hammer at all. The shift kit shows putting this on the table like so and putting a socket over it like this and hitting the socket with a hammer. Now we could put that on the table and use this piece of pipe just like the socket and hit it just like that, and it works just fine. The point is we're not hitting this with the hammer.